Okay, let's get started. So this is the ins and outs of media tie-in writing. We'll start by having the panelists briefly introduce themselves, starting with Kevin.
I'm Kevin. Or you want more than that? Okay.
A little bit more than that. Not that brief.
All right, yeah. I've been, most of my published work is media tie-in. I actually got in through the writing for Star Trek when they had the Strange New Worlds competition and was able to get into that anthology. And then Keith here made a terrible executive mistake and tapped me to do a couple of books for the Star Trek Corps of Engineers series. From there, I just sort of stumbled into role-playing games and have written a lot for a variety of games. If you're not in the industry or in the games or don't play the games, you don't know that there's like this humongous, like, ever-expanding library that I write for. So if you want to know what a thief on Tharkat is wearing, I probably wrote the descriptions. And I did write. I got into one Doctor Who anthology. I always like to point that out. I have branched into original fiction, but right now I'm with Catalyst Game Labs, putting together a launch of a new campaign addition to the universe.
Cool. I'm Jonathan Maberry. I'm a New York Times bestselling author in a lot of different genres, but I'm also the president of the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers. My first New York Times bestseller was, in fact, a media tie-in book. It was the novelization of The Wolfman. And I've not only been in scores of media tie-in anthologies, Planet of the Apes, G.I. Joe, tons of these. I've also edited anthologies in that genre, including Aliens, Bug Hunt, which is the Aliens franchise. I was in, my latest media tie-in is Don't Turn Out the Lights, which is a tribute to Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. It's actually the only official tribute to it. And this comes out in hardcover September 1st with 35 writers writing stories for younger middle grade, but it's tied to that license. And I also have, in the weird position of having a couple of my own worlds turn into official licenses. My V-Wars became an official license, and Keith and several others have written excellent stories for that. And my Joe Ledger thriller series, which also Keith was in, we had an anthology there called Joe Ledger Unstoppable, and a lot of fine writers there. And then Keith and I have shared a lot of tables of content on different anthologies over the years. So I love media tie-in work. I love working with licenses, and I think it's an underappreciated and undervalued corner of the fiction world.
And I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido. I've written in about 35 different licensed universes at this point, starting back in 1994 when I wrote a Spider-Man short story, and continuing to recently doing an Alien novel for Titan Books. In between there, I've done a lot of Star Trek. I've also done Supernatural, World of Warcraft, StarCraft, Supernatural, The X-Files, which was also for Jonathan. I did a short story. Mm-hmm. Kung Fu Panda, Cars, Farscape, Doctor Who, Andromeda, and lots of other stuff too. The Orphan Black, Sleepy Hollow, Leverage.
Nice.
Probably some others that I'm sure I've forgotten. And also, I contributed to the Joe Ledger, which is worth mentioning only because that is responsible for the one and only award I've won for my fiction, which was a Scribe Award from the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers, of which Jonathan is the president. Every year they give out the Scribe Awards, and I've been nominated for about a dozen different awards, but the only one I won was one I split with Jonathan for his Planet of the Apes story, with my Joe Ledgers. I've also been an editor in the field, as Kevin mentioned. I edited the Starfleet Corps of Engineers series. I edited a series of Marvel Comics-based novels from 1994 to 2000, which for a long time was the largest non-comics single story based on Marvel superheroes until Kevin Feige came along and stole my thunder. But so let's start with the cliched question. How did you guys get involved in doing tie-in work? Kevin, you first.
Me first.
You mentioned Strange New Worlds, so tell us about Strange New Worlds.
Well, so the Strange New Worlds at the time was a Simon & Schuster did a contest for writers who had not been published, and due to my terrific marketing skills, I'd never been published. So I was able to enter into that, and basically I had been writing Star Trek fan fiction back when we were exchanging mimeograph pages when we all met in gymnasiums. So that was a while back. So I felt very comfortable with Star Trek, and I just kept writing. Basically, I sent in like 27, 28 stories. 3 of them ended up getting into various anthologies. And it was really funny because I know that at the time the Gatekeeper editor, Dean Wesley Smith, and I'd ask him about, when I got to meet him later and was in workshops with him, I asked him about some of the ones that he had no idea that any of my stories that he didn't pick, that I'd written them. He didn't notice them. He looked at the story. And so it wasn't name recognition or anything. It was just, I eventually wore him down. And that was it in 2000. And that was actually my first sale. And I've been writing ever since. Well, I was writing before, but now I'm getting paid for it, which is an unusual feeling.
Yeah.
Stranger Worlds was a wonderful project. That lasted for about a decade, and it was a really good way to give non-professional writers an opportunity to become professionals. A lot of people got their start there, not just Kevin, but also Phaedra Weldon, Ilsa Bick, Jeffrey Thorne, Dayton Ward.
Yeah.
All these people, some of them who didn't even continue in Star Trek. You went on to do stuff for BattleTech. So did Ilsa. Phaedra's got a whole series of mysteries that have been doing very well for her. Jeffrey Thorne's been writing for television. He was on The Librarians and on Leverage, and is doing other TV stuff now. It's just been, and then there's some like Dayton who've gone on to continue to work on Star Trek. But it was a great fertile ground for people to find new writers, not just for Star Trek, but just in general. Jonathan, how'd you get? I know you came into the professional writing through nonfiction initially.
Yeah, I was a nonfiction writer since the late 70s. Magazine features, nonfiction books, all sorts of things. And I only got into fiction in 2006, but I've done a lot of fiction since then. But the way I got involved in media tie-in, the 2 things happened within a couple of weeks of each other. First, I had the flu one year, and I have this thing, when I get sick, I marathon monster movies. So one day happened to be my werewolf marathon. I was putting up on Facebook, asking for suggestions for werewolf films I hadn't seen before. And the following day, I got a phone call out of the blue from the vice president in charge of licensing at Universal Pictures, her assistant had apparently followed me on Facebook and saw the thread. And she said, this VP said, I'm sure you've heard of the Wolfman. And it's like, yes, who hasn't heard of the Wolfman? And she said, we're doing a remake with Benicio del Toro. And I said, yeah, I'd read about it in the trades. She said, would you like to write the novel? Because unlike Frankenstein and Dracula or Invisible Man, there was never a Wolfman novel. There were werewolf novels, but not a Wolfman novel. And luckily my agent is like an angel on my shoulder. She kicks me in the head if I say yes to anything before I direct it to her. So I turfed it over to her. They made a deal, and I wound up writing The Wolfman, and had a blast doing that. But the same week that happened, my agent and I had been strategizing on how to get on the radar of Marvel Comics. And we didn't know anyone in Marvel Comics at the time. And I got a call, again, out of the blue. Axel Alonso, who was the editor-in-chief of Marvel, had been back on a plane in LA to fly to New York, picked up, he'd forgotten his Kindle. So he picked up a novel at the airport bookstore. It had to be my novel, Patient Zero, my 4th novel, which was the first of the Joe Ledger thriller series. Right off the plane, gets back to his office and calls me up and says, would you have any interest in writing for Marvel? Which, by the way, the silliest question I've ever been asked. Would you have any interest in writing for Marvel? Kiss my butt, go away. So I wound up, the first thing he gave me was an 8-page Wolverine short, which I did, and with incredible art by Tom Coker. And then the next was something called Punisher Max, which is their really edgy adult line of Punisher comics. And I wrote something for that, and then I was off and running doing freelance for Marvel. So my entry into it was both were surprise phone calls, and yay, so apparently, the gods of media tie-in were looking after me.
Yeah, I should publish my number, I think.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, my business number is on my Facebook page. It's on my LinkedIn page. They had, the assistant had seen me on Facebook and then went over to LinkedIn, got my contact information, and gave it to the boss. Yay.
Mine, I started actually as an editor. Like I said, I was editing for the late Byron Price from 1993 until 99. And so I was working as an editor on a bunch of different licensed projects that he had, and one of the projects we had was the aforementioned Marvel property. We did like over 50 books, novels and short story anthologies, featuring Spider-Man, the X-Men, the Avengers, and so on. And the first two books we did were a Spider-Man novel by Diane Duane, The Venom Factor, and a short story anthology called The Ultimate Spider-Man. This was in 1994, 6 years before Marvel did their Ultimate line, so we were there first. And we had already put the cover together. It was a framed cover with Spider-Man in the middle and 4 of his villains in the 4 corners. We had stories with 3 of those villains. We did not have a Venom story, and this was in 1994 when Venom was by far Spider-Man's most popular villain. We had Dr. Octopus, we had the Vulture, we had the Lizard. We didn't have Venom. Not for lack of trying. We had, and we can get more into what this entails shortly. Part of the process of doing a tie-in work is that everything you do has to be approved by somebody, a representative of whoever owns it. Mm-hmm. You don't, the author, none of us have the rights to any of the properties that we've worked in. It's owned by Marvel or CBS or Catalyst Games Labs or Universal Pictures or whoever. So that somebody from the owner has to approve what you do. The people at Marvel kept not approving all the Venom stories we sent them. And finally, we're past the 11th hour, and it's like, give us something. What do you want to see in a Venom story? They gave us a sentence. Me and my co-editor, John Gregory Betancourt, then wrote the story based on that sentence in about 3 days because we had to get the damn thing done. We couldn't not have a Venom story. This is how I wrote my first piece of short fiction. And it kind of snowballed from there. I did other Marvel stories for that line. I obviously didn't edit those. Other people in the company did the editing work on those. I did a Silver Surfer story, another Spider-Man story, an X-Men story, a Hulk story. And then I did a Spider-Man novel with Jose Nieto, and then just sort of continued on from there. So yeah, and what's interesting about this is each of us has a completely different story, none of which is replicable by anybody else. Mm-hmm. So that, yeah. Another cliche question, but it's always fun to get the answer. What is the license you've worked on that gave you the biggest thrill to do, and why? Oh. Jonathan, you first this time.
It's a split. It's tied, but a good tie. I was always a fan of zombies. I actually snuck into the movie theater at age 10 to see the world premiere of Night of the Living Dead. Huge fan of the genre. Huge fan of George Romero, and he and I had done some panels together. So I cooked up the idea of doing an anthology and editing an anthology of stories set around the events of Night of the Living Dead. And once I got approval from the publisher, I went out and I reached out to George just to see if he'd give his blessing for it. And he said he'd do it on 3 conditions. One, he wanted to be co-editor. I'm like, okay, that would work for
twist.
Yeah. He said he would write a story for the anthology, and I'm like, I'm okay with that too. And then third, he said he wanted me to write a story that connected my Dead of Night and Fall of Night books to Night of the Living Dead officially. He wanted me to take one of the characters that I had killed off in one of the books. He said, well, that character didn't die on screen, on the page. He was just referred to dead, so I want him alive. I like him. Take him and bring him to the house in Night of the Living Dead. Put that story in the book, and then we have a deal. And I may have ugly cried a little bit. I'm not sure. So that agreement turned out to be this book, Nights of the Living Dead, which also has a story by Keith, and everyone else who's like a top zombie writer. David Wellington, Isaac Marion, Jay Bonansinga, Carrie Ryan, Brian Keene, Craig Engler. I mean, it's a who's who of people who are, luminaries in the zombie world. The second project I did that was a personal favorite of mine that just really, I was asked by John Joseph Adams, a great anthologist, edits some of the top anthologies, of stories for a book called Oz Reimagined, right? And I wrote a story. Originally, I wanted to write a story that was going to be like something that would speak to my personal audience. I wanted to write a story about the Tin Man getting the heart of a serial killer and going on a rampage with his axe. Would have been fun to write. But I didn't want to offend the actual readership of the Oz books who were little kids. So I wrote a cute little story about a little winged monkey girl whose wings were too small to fly, so she tried to find magic traveling shoes, and to take her all the place her wings would go. And the story came out. It got a lot of press. And then the estate of L. Frank Baum reached out to me and said that they are henceforth including that story as a prequel to The Wizard of Oz forever. Definitely helped me cry on that one. So those were my two favorite projects to do for different reasons. I mean, one was Childhood Dream, working with George Romero, and that turned out to be the last project George finished before he died. So that, it was very bittersweet. And then doing something that's now part of the official chronology of Oz is surreal. I mean, that's just surreal. So that's me.
Kevin, what about you?
Oh, well, I have absolutely nothing on that scale.
Not a competition.
Well, obviously, two science fiction properties that I've been a big fan of, Doctor Who and Star Trek, but I never did anything that changed anything with those.
Well, that doesn't matter. I mean, it's just it's what you enjoyed.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, and but when I first got into, I discovered BattleTech, which at the time was under WizKids, and basically because I was at a writing workshop on the Oregon coast, and I met Lauren Coleman, who was writer and editor and everything with them, and was trying to get anyway, he was launching a fiction site. And I talked to him. He showed me some of the technical readouts and player game, explained how the game worked to me. And that was on a Tuesday. So on Thursday, I gave him my first BattleTech story, and he bought it. But he wanted to change, and so Saturday he bought it. But anyway, so while I was doing the stuff for the writing workshop, so I really was happy that happened. And then when I got into the universe, and as I mentioned in another setting, game people are a whole lot more intense than Trekkies ever were in terms of you follow the canon and be sure. So I would make up ways for things to fit, and I would just do my own spin on stuff. And I ended up writing for a lot of their source books for players. Unbeknownst to me, they had a writer fall through on a project they had when WizKids was doing novels. And so Sharon Mulvihill, the editor, asked Herb Bays, who was the editor of the books I was doing, said, do you know anybody who can turn out something that, because we need, this is it's past deadline, the guy walked, we have the outline, what do we, And so Herb said, yeah, Killiany, gave her my contact information. And so she got up with me, and I wrote, the book was Wolf Hunters, and it did not really follow the outline very much at all, actually, once I told it. It was in the Mech Warrior Dark Age universe. And it was 97,000 words, and I wrote it in 90 days, and it came back with superficial notes and one continuity error. And that was all right. I felt good. I had done that. And I got a deal with them for several novels, and Topps bought them, and the contract went away. But I got my foot in the door. But those are the two tie-in writing things that I felt the most accomplishment about. And it doesn't always work that way. I have opposite stories too. But anyway,
yeah.
We'll just
for me, it's also a tie as with Jonathan, because it's hard to choose. One getting to work in Star Trek is like Jonathan's with George Romero, a childhood dream. I grew up watching Star Trek. My childhood is coming home from school. My parents come home from work. We would sit down in front of the TV and watch Star Trek reruns on Channel 11 in New York, and then we'd have dinner. That was our weekday routine. And I remember growing up with this stuff. I remember having nightmares about the salt vampire from the Man Trap and the big green fat guy from In the Children Shall Eat, and loving the Tholian Web, because that was always my favorite episode as a kid for whatever reason, and loving the Spock McCoy banter. That was what I grew up with. I devoured Star Trek novels and Star Trek comic books as a kid. The James Blish books, and then later the novels that Simon & Schuster published. And I wanted to be the guy who wrote that, and I got to be the guy who wrote that for 10 years. And it was great. And in particular, one novel I did called Articles of the Federation, which was a year in the life of the Federation president, because Star Trek on screen has shown very little of Federation politics. We've seen the politics of every other species in the Star Trek universe, but not the Federation. So I did basically a Star Trek version of the West Wing. And I figured, we'd see President Baco in that one novel, and one other novel I did, a Next Gen novel where she got elected, and we'd never see her again. She turned into a major supporting character because everybody else wanted to write her too. So she wound up showing up in multiple novels over the next several years. So that was great. The fact that I contributed something to not to the main Star Trek continuity, but at the very least to the tapestry. A character who was then used in so many other sources. Star Trek Online used her too as part of their future history. And so that was cool. The other one is Farscape. Farscape was a show on the Sci-Fi Channel from started in 1999 and ran for 4 years, and it was like many other shows have done. Farscape, after it went off the air, continued the story in comic book form, and I'm the guy who got to write it, and I got to write it in collaboration with Rockne O'Bannon, who was the creator of the show. There are few things more heady than being able to collaborate with the person who created it, who likes your work enough to work with you on it and to help basically move the actual main story forward. And as far as the creator of the show is concerned, what we did is the virtual season 5 of the show. So yeah, that was those two things were. Yeah,
it's talking about characters that you create that are used by other writers. That's a really heady thing. I created some stuff when I was writing Black Panther for Marvel. I created some characters and some situations, and then when Ta-Nehisi Coates took over, he actually used some of that as the foundation for his run. Now,
nice.
I mean, he's done amazing work with it, but it's so much fun to see, characters and situations. One of the elements from my Doom War series became an element of the Spider-Man comic for a while, because I destroyed all the Wakandan vibranium. So Peter Parker was trying to create synthetic Wakandan vibranium. So seeing those echoes is surreal, because we all started out as fans of this stuff, and now we're part of it in one way or another, whether it's official, movie or TV canon, or comic book canon, or whatever. We made our footprint there. It's in the soil of that foreign world. So, and by the way, Kevin, I love your Doctor Who story. I have Doctor Who envy. I've never written a Doctor Who story.
Oh, thank you. You are the fourth person I've met who actually read that. That's wonderful.
Hey, I read it too. I'm in that same book.
Yeah, that's because you were in the book. You had to see. Yeah.
Yeah, I have that book. Actually, I bought it because of Keith.
Oh.
And because I didn't know who you were at the time, and then I read the book, and I started reading from the writers who wrote the best stories. I started following their other works, and that's where I found some of the other things you've done, Star Trek and so on. So.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Well, thank you very much. That means a lot. Thanks
for writing good stuff. Yeah, both you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. The part of the joy of this, and I use joy in a guarded sense, is that, as I said earlier, everything has to be approved by the people who own it. What are some of the weirder notes that you guys have gotten over the years?
This is one that explains why writers drink. So I was writing this for Marvel. It's my own take on, it's not zombies, it's more like the 28 Days Later. a global pandemic causes most of the population to revert into kind of a cannibalistic Neanderthal sort of, meat-eating subhuman species or sub-intelligent species. And the Punisher's accidentally the cause of it. And in the original pitch, he accidentally releases this virus during a gun battle with Russian mafia. And then, we roll forward several years later, and he's the only non-infected left. Everyone else is one of these monsters. And, his world is simplified. Bad guys and me. And maybe I can save my soul by killing all the bad guys, even though that would mean killing everyone. Then it turns out there are human survivors, and he has to start caring, and he started looking for them. In the original version of it, my original script was the next to the last page, you see all the survivors are now, they've escaped from New York, and they're all sitting around a campfire, and they're happy, and he's rescued them, and there's enough to maybe start humanity again. And he's sitting apart, drinking his coffee, and kind of smiling to himself that maybe he's found redemption. Turn the page, he's sitting there with his coffee, but there's no one else. He's going so completely nuts that he only imagines he saved everyone. The world is destroyed, and he killed it. Well, that's what Marvel bought. And then Disney bought Marvel. And I slipped in, and I'm working on the second issue, and my editor calls me up and says, well, the suits at Disney say we can't do that. We can't make the Punisher crazy. Like, first off, the Punisher actually is crazy. He is completely friggin' mind crazy. So I just made him crazier. And they're like, no, we can't do it. And the dictate came down that either I changed the ending or they canceled the book. And it was too new in my career to want to make a stand. And they also sweetened the deal by saying, we'll give you sequels. We'd like to do an Avengers run, a Wolverine run, all set in that universe. And I caved. And I really wish I hadn't. I wish I'd stuck to my guns, because I think that version of the story, this sold really well, but I think that would have been a lot bigger a story. But that was a note that I still will never forgive them and never forgive myself.
What about you, Kevin?
Well, at Gen Con in 2005, I met some people who were with Black Library, do the Warhammer and Warhammer 40K and all of that. And I really hit it off. And so and I'm in old age, I cannot remember the man's name. Actually, I couldn't remember names when I was young, so it doesn't matter. But anyway, I have it written down. But he invited me to pitch, to write for them. And I sent in some stuff. He said, well, this is great. We can't use it, though. You need, this has to be that and whatever. So I read more Warhammer than I could ever imagined was there, so I could get a real feel for how everything worked. And I'm sending the things off, and the thing finally said, all right, the problem is you live on a southern coastal city. Your stories are too damn cheerful. You have to live you have to come live in the Midlands for a few winters so that you'll get the feel of the universe. And I sat there and said, I don't want to live in the Midlands. And I like being a little bit cheerful. So I kind of backed out on, we parted ways, because I was not the person for them. I could not shape my head to write for them. On the other side of it, there was a universe I really wanted to write for. And for a while I was engaged with working with Valiant. They have their movie Deadshot is out now, Valiant Universe, and I was writing Shadow Man, who is a guy who's dead and alive. Long story. Anyway, doing all of this, and they were putting together a role-playing game. So I was doing all the character things and everything for the role-playing game, and it kept going to them. And apparently it was pretty much the same issue, actually. Almost nothing that I wrote. They bought a lot of it. None of it made it into real life. It never actually happened. So I have to just, have to take my word for it. And I think that was but what I liked about that is they bought it. I just never get to brag about it because they didn't use it. And, it's not the sort of thing you can scrape the serial numbers off and reuse, so it's so those are my one story. I don't know why they didn't take it. And that'll always, someday I'll meet them again at Gen Con and say, hey, you guys, you bought this, you never used it. What happened?
One of one of there's two different types of tie-in books. There's tie-in novels, which are original works that are based on an existing universe, and then there are novelizations. And, like Jonathan's Wolfman novelization, and I've novelized several movies, including Serenity, the first 3 Resident Evil films, a couple others. There's one movie novelization I did, I'm not going to name which it was, because it didn't actually get published. And the biggest problem, I novelized the film, and when you're novelizing a movie, you have to add stuff, because a movie doesn't actually have a novel's worth of story in it.
And they don't show you the film.
I'm sorry?
And they don't show you the film.
Well, most of the time the film isn't done yet, because of the lead time. I was lucky with Serenity, because it got delayed and then there were rough cuts, so at least I got to see a rough cut of the film beforehand. And there've been other films, like there was one I did a novelized film called Darkness Falls, where they actually showed us, they changed the ending, but they called us in and showed us a rough cut of the new footage for the ending so we could work it into the book at the last minute, which was great. They were wonderful. But there are others that were less helpful. And this one movie where I busted my ass, I had 10 days to write this thing. I wrote it, turned it in, and all the notes are, well, you can't, this isn't in the script. You can't put that in there. And it's like, if I take all this stuff out, it's going to be a pamphlet. It's not going to be a novel. And they said, well, we also want to run it by the producers first. So they sent it to the producers, who sat on it and never said anything about it. So the book never got published. That was just maddening. And I am not the only person who has written a movie novelization who has come across this problem.
Yeah.
I mean, and in contrast, there are others, like, like I mentioned, Darkness Falls. For the 3rd Resident Evil film, they actually encouraged me to add stuff. There was one character where the actress was not available to be in the 3rd film, but they wanted to keep the character around for future films, so they told me, give her a subplot. It was the Jill Valentine character. They said, basically, give her something to do so we know explain where she is so we can bring her back for the next movie, which they did. So that was cool.
Hey, can I ask you cats a question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What licenses are on your dream list? Like, what ones would you love to do?
That we haven't done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always wanted to do there are a bunch, actually. I wanted to do a Homicide Life on the Street novel, but they hired a mystery writer to do those when they came out, and I can't really blame them for that. I actually pitched a Highlander novel back in the day. There was one, unfortunately, it was 3 authors for 1 slot, and they picked one of the other 2. I also would have loved to have done a novel based on the new on Ron Moore's Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah.
And unfortunately did not get to the opportunity to pitch to that. Those are probably the 3 biggies that I haven't gotten to do. I've been lucky in that I've gotten to do a lot of some of my favorite stuff.
Cool. Kevin?
Well, my big dream ones, both of them I already wrote for. One I won't again because Big Finish can't do the books anymore, and BBC doesn't talk to me for some reason. I don't know. Anyway, to be honest, I tend to write up. There almost everything I see, I want my hands on. I want to put my spin on. And so if you ask me what my favorite thing I want to do, it could be, well, Keith, a show you loved a long time ago, which I'm finally seeing, The Wire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I can do that. And I thought, well, I'm too cheerful. Well, I can make a happy ending. We can do this. And just about any time I see a show on TV that speaks to me, I've got this independent movie channel thing I've been watching now, and that's been like, I want to do that. And then, I got notes. So I'm sorry, I'm terribly fickle, is what I am. I just love when I see a set thing and what I can possibly do with it. I really think, I'm going to get philosophical for just a second. Writing like media tie-in is like playing, like second chair or something in an orchestra. I mean, it's a creative part. Everybody else is doing something, and there is a little thing you can put in there, and that'll help. And that just really excites me. I just like that idea a lot.
Dave? Did you already answer this one?
Yeah, I answered first. You didn't answer.
Yeah. I know there's one of us. I'm getting old. What can I say?
So much
It's
alike, yeah.
isolation. I'm blaming on.
I'm the one with the beard.
Yeah. So there are a couple that I would really love to work on, but there's no force, no money behind the license anymore, which is kind of a problem. Like,
Yeah.
I would love to
Yeah.
do Lake 7. I would like to completely, not only as novels, but I mean, there's been a bunch of novels and a bunch of audio dramas.
Yeah.
But I would love to rebuild or restart Lake 7. You know, write it from the beginning. Always a favorite of mine. Also, I'd like to go back and take some of the shows I grew up with and write novels using those cast of characters and make them contemporary with a little more logic, like Land of the Giants, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. I mean, the shows always started well and then got silly, as Irwin Allen often did. But I would love to write those stories. Combat, which was one of my favorite shows as a kid.
Oh, yes.
Love to have written that.
Yes.
But, you know, on more practical terms, I would like to write a Star Wars novel. And my agent keeps trying to talk me out of it, and I keep trying to talk her into it. I would love to do Star Wars. One of my dream projects, which unfortunately I can't actually name, I just got I just closed a deal with DC to do that character. So that's something that we'll be announcing, a bit down the road. But that was one of my big dream projects, and now I'm actually doing it. So I've kind of made it a mission in my life to check off all of my dream projects and get to work with them somehow. In terms, there's one other license that almost no one knows it anymore, but it was a great show back in the 70s called UFO. It was a British science fiction show.
Yeah.
Had a Supreme Headquarters Alien Defense Organization.
Right.
I think that could be a brilliant series of novels or a new comic book. So one of those. But again, there's no money behind the license. So
yeah.
I don't write fan fiction because we're all working pros, so I need to get paid for what I do.
Right.
But damn, I want to write those stories.
Yeah, I've been lucky in that I've gotten to do a lot. I mean, a lot of the ones I wanted to do. Three of my biggest loves as a kid were Star Trek, Marvel, and Doctor Who, and I've gotten to work in all of them. I fell in love with Farscape and got to work on that.
Yeah, I haven't done Star Trek yet either.
Yeah. I actually wouldn't mind doing Star Wars either. That's something that I was a huge fan of as a kid. Kind of was more of a casual fan, and I've been getting more into it again. Actually, what got me back excited about the possibility of writing a Star Wars novel was Rogue One. Specifically, that one. But I like you. I have not had absolutely no luck in getting in on that. It's a tough license to get into. Yeah, the script was written by Gary Whitta, and I'll be doing some work with him on something coming up. Another cool thing I can't mention. But we lost our one audience member, unfortunately, and I was gonna open it up to questions, and she disappeared. Oh, that's
okay. I'm having a great time.
Yeah.
People who watch this will be learning too. I think one of the things I kind of picked up on, both of you guys you've been writers all along. Yes, no, yeah.
I mean, I've been writing my entire adult life. I was doing, like Jonathan, I started out doing nonfiction, writing news stories and reviews and stuff like that. And then that was starting in 1989. And then in 94, I moved into fiction, and I still do nonfiction, but yeah. And I didn't start writing fiction until 2006. Before that, writing was my part-time job. My day job was bodyguard, bouncer, college instructor, jiu-jitsu master.
Okay, that's good. And I see how those all relate too. So that's good. Yeah.
Professional thug.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, no, the reason I say that is a lot of times people who are coming into this or are watching these later and recording and all, I thought I was going to be a writer to begin. My mother was a correspondent. My uncle wrote political novels, and I certainly wasn't an engineer like my dad, so I figured that maybe I got the writing gene. And it never worked. But first of all, later on, looking back, I did a lot of wrong things as a young person trying to be a writer. And I ended up following other things. I mean, I went to California to become an actor. That worked out really well, by the way. That's one of the movies. And I ended up, ended up being a teacher, exceptional children's teacher for many years, and I ended up working in mental health for many years. So I was doing things, and then I would come home and I would write these things. And when I was in mental health, I would write stories about mental health things, and those didn't go very well. One property I don't want to write for is Monk. I used to help people like that all the time. That was not that was not a good show.
Of course, now he's an icon for social distancing. So
yeah, I know.
Yeah, well,
there he is. Yeah, so I didn't see that coming. I did not. And so for me, I would get these tips like, you should do this, and if I could move on it, I could. But there'd be times when, like, I just did 70 hours in crisis counseling. Yeah, okay. Sorry, I can't do anything for you. Because I wasn't there. I was an intervention counselor for a while.
Yeah.
And the writing for me, I think, might have been more therapeutic and everything than anything else. And I think it was part of the writing the million words of crap I had to get out before I got to actually being able to write something that meant something. So I just want to, so you won't have the opportunity of sitting in the same room when somebody says, golly, I wish we had someone to write Star Wars novels. And you'd say, hey, I mean, I know someone that happened to. You know, you don't, that may never happen to you, but you keep looking around, and it's, and what you said about fan fiction is not really a gateway into writing professionally. You need to write.
I know some fan fiction folks who became, like Nancy Holder and so on, started writing fan fiction, and that was her, you know, her writing sample to break in.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not, I mean, it's a perfectly legitimate hobby, as long as you don't, you know, mistake it for professional writing, but that doesn't mean it's better or worse. It's just different. You know, and fanfic has the advantage in that you can do whatever the hell you want and don't have to get it approved by anybody, which can be useful sometimes. One of the more interesting experiences I had when I was writing supernatural fiction, the 3 supernatural novels I did were early in the show's run. It was during the 2nd, 3rd, and 5th seasons, and so the show was still kind of forming when I was, and it was interesting seeing the different responses people had, including some of the fanfic writers who had their own ideas of what Sam and Dean were like, which weren't necessarily the same as other people's ideas of what Sam and Dean were like, and I had, as an official tie-in writer, I was beholden to what was established on screen, whereas if you're writing fanfic, you can interpret more. And I noticed some of the negative reviews were people who didn't feel that I matched their interpretation of Sam and Dean. You know, and there's nothing you can do about that. You know, I mean, the best you can do is try to match what they give you.
When you talk about fan reactions for a second, stuff, when the Wolfman came out, this was around the same time that the Twilight books and films were exploding.
Yeah,
and I got some pretty harsh reviews from teens who said I stole the idea of a werewolf having a love affair with a human from Twilight. Well, to digest. I'm like, boy, you are really young, aren't you?
Yeah.
Good God.
Yeah, I've gotten some entertaining reviews, and what I love in particular is jumping back to Supernatural again. This is about the same book. One review which will say that I wrote Dean perfectly, but it's obvious that I don't understand Sam at all. And then the very next review says that I wrote Sam perfectly, and I obviously don't understand Dean at all. Although my absolute favorite was in, I think it was in Nevermore, my first one. I had Dean picking a lock. And somebody on some blog somewhere was saying, well, obviously this idiot never watched the show because everybody knows that Sam's the one who picks locks. And first of all, I can't imagine that only one of them learned that skill.
Yeah.
Plus, Sam, when the show started, Sam was away in college and had been for a couple of years, and I can't imagine that during that time, Dean would come across a locked door and go, oh, well, and leave.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And secondly, not long after the book came out, there was an episode of Supernatural in which Dean picked a lock. I only said I told you so a little bit. Yeah. I mean, having said that, you know, sometimes they catch you in things and you get stuff wrong. It's I don't know how we did this job before Wikipedia has existed. I really don't.
Oh God, fan wikis are the best.
Oh yeah.
They're incredible. Regular wikis, but fan wikis are the best. When I started writing for Marvel, I hadn't read Marvel comics. I stopped reading around 1990, and then 2008, early 2009, when I started writing for Marvel, I had to get up to speed on characters, and that's a lot of years. And Marvel changed a lot because Axel Alonso had come on board, and he had changed the direction of it. They did these big arcs, and a lot of things were different. And if it wasn't for fan wikis, I would never have been able to get up to speed. So I do have an interesting little side note about this is one of those things that just is weird. So when I did the first draft of the Wolfman, right, I turned it in, based on the script. I wrote my Gothic novel around the script, turned it in, and within about 2 weeks, I got a call saying, we're not going to give you edits right now. We're going to go do reshoots because they decided to redo the ending. And so, even though they had said that we need this in 7 weeks, and I gave it to them in 7 weeks, now there's a delay. They come back, they said, okay, well, here are the changes we're making in it. And the only thing we can show you is the trailer. So I said, okay. So I watch a trailer. Emily Blunt is saying a line that was in my book that was not in the original script. And they took it out of my book and put it into the movie. It's a scene where she's on the edge of the cliff, the Wolfman's coming at her. She's like, Lawrence, you know who I am. That's my scene. That wasn't in the original. That was my scene. I was like, what do I do? Turns out they actually own everything I write when you write a media type.
Well, yeah.
So no big Hollywood check came out of that, but you get a nice note from Emily, though. So it's nice.
The jumping back to the fans, one thing I've noticed is that the studios are sensibly also sometimes hiring fans. On my Alien book, I got my timeline stuff fact-checked by a fan who had, on his own, put together a whole Alien timeline, and 20th Century Fox hired him to basically to backstop the timeline stuff on the various Alien tie-ins that they've done, which was hugely helpful because I screwed it up a couple of times.
Charlene Harrison had a fan helping with, she did an anthology of True Blood stories,
right.
And the continuity was checked by a fan.
Yeah. And it's great that they're taking advantage of that and monetizing it. One of the interesting things that does happen occasionally, and doesn't happen nearly often enough because practically it can't, is when I mentioned that I got to work with Rockney O'Bannon on the Farscape comic, but that was the show was off the air at that point. So, but it's always every once in a while you actually get to work with the people involved in creating it as they're creating it. Your Wolfman example was a good one. Where there was a certain amount of back and forth there. It doesn't happen very often because usually showrunners are too busy running a show to actually read novels. But every once in a while, it does happen. When I did a Heroes Reborn novella based on when they brought Heroes back for the miniseries in 2015. The approval notes all came from the showrunner. I didn't realize it was him until the show was on the air and I saw his name come up as the executive producer. I'm like, wait a minute. Because they were very committed to making sure that what we were doing was consistent with the show, which you don't always see, but it's nice when what you're getting now, especially in the last 20 years, are people who grew up reading tie-in fiction who are now creating content in Hollywood. Yeah. You've got guys like Sam Raimi and Joss Whedon and Ryan Coogler and
nerds, just like us.
They
were nerds. They're nerds just like us.
Yeah.
My one odd, very interesting connection in terms of the creator being involved was when I was doing the X-Files anthologies. Chris Carter, he wanted to approve every story, and I had asked that they be canon. So when we turned in, we did all three volumes of the anthology series. He actually read every story and gave it either a thumbs up or thumbs down. And some of the notes that I had to go back to the writers with were actually from Chris, and which is great because all the stories became official X-Files canon. And when I did my X-Files Dana Scully novel about her as a teenager, he wanted me to pitch it to him over the phone. So I just pitched the story, and he's like, "Yeah, definitely go do that. But let me see it when it's done." And it worked out really well.
Yeah, you don't always get that kind of feedback, but
no, I was surprised.
Anyway, Yeah, we are coming up on the end of this, so we should probably like do the thing where we plug our work and tell people where to find us online and stuff. Before we do that, I want to mention one thing that we should also plug, which is the thing that you're president of, Jonathan, the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers. You can find us online at iamtw.org. There are various resources online on that site that are helpful if you want to break into this ridiculous field that all three of us are involved in, and other cool stuff. And that's a good place to go to find out more about this stuff. So iamtw.org.
Yeah, we'll be announcing the Scribe Awards virtually in July, because normally they're presented at San Diego Comic-Con, but clearly that's not happening. So it'll probably be a video of me wearing a shirt, possibly pants, I'm not sure. We won't pan down.
That's it.
Announcing the winners.
Yeah.
So Kevin, what's your latest?
My latest, well, a big project for Catalyst Game Labs I can't talk about, which will be coming out. And really, that's my latest. That's what I'm really working on now. What I have in media tie-in, that's about it. My original fiction is what I was trying to work on most recently, and I've got, as I think, what is it? Yeah, actually, Keith, you did say that. Yeah, you said Kevin Killiany's writing sucks. No, Kevin Killiany's delightful.
No, that wasn't.
Writing. That was my. That was the one right there. Yes.
Yes.
Rise from Dirt. Actually, what you said was delightfully immersive writing sucks you right in. But I mean, if you just look at it real quick, Kevin Killiany's writing sucks. If you just write down vertically there, I'm like, okay, thank you. But yeah, the Dirt and Stars series is a young adult hard science dystopian series. I got 3 novels out there, 3 more coming, but some real life issues kind of got in the way, and they're actually going to start coming out next spring.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of stuff coming up this year. Pandemica, my comic about the global plague, which I started writing before.
Good timing.
Yeah.
Good time. Which, by the way, the last issue is delayed because of the plague. But anyway, the trade of that will be out this year. The last book in my Rotten Ruin series, Lost Roads, will be out in August. A horror novel about haunted tattoos, Ink, will be out in November. And then early next year, I'll have 2 books out. I'll have the 12th Joe Ledger novel, Relentless, and the first of my epic fantasy series, Kagan the Damned. And already getting film interest in that, even though I haven't written a word of it yet. So that's kind of weird. So maybe that'll turn into a license and I'll have people writing stories set in that world. Who knows?
Oh, okay.
There you go. The most recent tie-in work I've done was my Alien novel, Isolation, which came out last summer, which is based on the 2014 video game, and which was I was very happy with that. I'd love to do more.
You don't need to have played
the main.
Yeah. You don't need to have played that game. I have never played the game, but I love the book. So.
Thank you. I was trying for that, and I love the character of Amanda Ripley. It's Ellen Ripley's daughter, who's the main character of the game, as well as the novel, and also a bunch of comic books that Dark Horse has done. And I'd love to do more with her, and I hope I get to. I've also most of what I've got coming out shortly is going to be either original stuff or collaborations. I've got a collaboration with David Sherman coming out this spring called To Hell and Regroup, which is the last book in David's 18th Race trilogy of military science fiction novels. We're funding that on Kickstarter right now. So if you go to my website at DeCandido.net, there's a link to it. I've got my collaboration with Dr. Munish K. Batra, who Jonathan introduced me to, actually, and we've been doing a bunch of things together. We've got a book called Animal, which is a book about a serial killer who goes after people who harm animals. That'll be out toward the end of this year from Wordfire Press. And I'm also working on the next books in my urban fantasy series taking place in the Bronx, and my fantasy police procedural taking place in the mythical city of Cliff's End. Hopefully those will be out either this year or early next year, depending on life. And a bunch of other things and anthologies and stuff coming out. So you can find me online at decandido.net. Jonathan, that's the link to all my social media and stuff. Jonathan, where can they find you?
JonathanMaberry.com, which is spelled Maberry without a Y in the middle. It's M-A-B-E-R-R-Y.
Yes. You can see it on the screen there. It's under your name. So.
Okay.
What about you, Kevin? Where are you on the interwebs?
I don't have I should be paying attention to the marketing thing, because I don't have a real web presence beyond Facebook, and I was part of a writing blog and 4 writers, and moderating that for a while, but it died of ennui, so it has faded away. But so no, all you got to do is look for me on Amazon or Evolve Publishing or on Facebook, and I'm there.
There you go. Jonathan, Kevin, thank you both so much for doing this. Kay, thank you for having us do this, and hopefully people will enjoy it.
Okay.